Alex Morgan blinked, the damp air of the basement closing in around him like a suffocating blanket. The first thing he noticed was the dim light, barely flickering from a single, ancient bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling. The next was the heavy, metallic taste of panic rising in his throat. His wrists were raw from where he'd pounded against the solid oak door, his voice hoarse from shouting. Above him, the faint sounds of the house creaked. Footsteps, hers. His mother. He called out again, his words splintering against the unyielding silence. Mom! Let me out. What are you doing? Then came her voice, muffled but chilling in its clarity. You need to learn, Alex, she said, her tone calm, as though she were discussing the weather. If you can't satisfy your wife, then it's only fair she seeks satisfaction elsewhere. The words hit him like a physical blow, leaving Alex stunned. For a moment, he thought he had misheard, that perhaps the pressure of the situation had twisted her words in his mind. But the creak of her footsteps moving away confirmed her conviction, leaving him alone in the oppressive silence once more. He slumped against the cold, stone wall, his heart pounding. What in God's name had just happened? Alex's life had been relatively straightforward, normal, even. He was an average guy with an average job, working as a systems analyst for a small tech firm in Indiana. He prided himself on his quiet life in the suburbs, a house he'd bought with his wife, Emma, just 3 years earlier. His mother, Linda Morgan, had been his only close family since his father passed away when Alex was 14. Their bond was strong, or so he had thought. Growing up, Linda had been fiercely protective, a single mother who gave everything for her only son. But her protectiveness often spilled into control. Little things, comments about his friends, his career choices, even the way he styled his hair, seemed harmless enough at the time. I just want the best for you, she would say, her smile warm but her eyes sharp. When Alex met Emma, he thought his life was finally falling into place. Emma was smart, charming, and ambitious, a paralegal with a sharp wit and a smile that lit up rooms. Their courtship had been a whirlwind, and within a year, they were married. Linda had welcomed Emma warmly at first, but over time, cracks began to form. Subtle remarks about Emma's career or her lack of interest in children piled up, and Alex often found himself playing mediator between the two most important women in his life. Lately, though, things had shifted. Emma had been distant. Their conversations were perfunctory, their physical connection strained. And now this, locked in a basement, accused by his own mother of inadequacy and betrayal. Hours passed. Or maybe it was minutes, time felt elastic in the stifling darkness. Alex's mind raced, replaying every interaction, every slight comment his mother had made about Emma. She's always on her phone. She spends too much time with that neighbor, Alan. You should pay more attention to her needs, Alex. A woman like that. The last remark, weeks ago, had stung, though he brushed it off at the time. Linda had never liked Alan, the single, charismatic neighbor who always seemed to have a reason to drop by. A noise startled him, a soft creak as the door above him opened slightly. He scrambled to his feet. Mom, he shouted. What is this about? What are you doing? Her voice floated down, detached and cool. I warned you, Alex. Emma deserves more. Alan, he can give her what you can't. Alex's mind reeled. What was she saying? That she condoned Emma and Alan. No, it wasn't possible. Emma wouldn't do that. The hours stretched into a painful eternity. Hunger gnawed at Alex's stomach, but the ache in his chest was worse. Memories of his relationship with Emma flooded his mind, their laughter, their dreams of traveling, the cozy nights spent watching reruns of their favorite shows. It didn't make sense. Had he been blind to something deeper? The sound of the door creaking again shattered his spiraling thoughts. This time, he heard the faint jingle of keys, and moments later, the door swung open. Linda stood there, her face a mask of smug satisfaction. Time to come up, she said simply. Alex climbed the stairs slowly, his legs stiff from sitting so long. As he emerged into the kitchen, the brightness of the light made him squint. Linda stood with her arms crossed, a picture of maternal authority. Why? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She tilted her head, her smile infuriatingly calm. Because you need to understand what you've done wrong. Sometimes, tough love is the only way. Later that evening, after Linda left, Alex sat in the quiet living room, the weight of the day pressing down on him. He picked up his phone, dialing Emma's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice tinged with surprise. "Alex? What's wrong?" "We need to talk," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "In person. Now." Emma hesitated but agreed to meet him at a nearby coffee shop. When Alex arrived, she was already there, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. Her expression was guarded, her eyes scanning his face for clues. "What's this about?" she asked, her tone wary. Alex took a deep breath. "I need to know the truth. About you. About Alan." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. For a moment, Emma said nothing, her gaze dropping to her mug. Then she spoke, her words cutting through him like glass. "You already know, don't you? Your mother's probably told you everything." Alex's stomach dropped. "Yes," Emma said, her voice cold and devoid of remorse. "I'm not happy, Alex. You've changed. Or maybe I have. I don't know. But Alan, he makes me feel alive again." He stared at her, struggling to breathe. "And you never thought to talk to me? To fix this?" Emma's gaze hardened. "Fix what, Alex? You can't fix what's broken in you." Her words hit him harder than any physical blow. Alex walked out of the coffee shop in a daze, his mind swirling with anger, hurt and a cold clarity. For years, he'd let his mother's control and Emma's subtle dismissiveness shape his life. No more. As he climbed into his car, his hands clenched the steering wheel with a resolve he hadn't felt in years. They would both learn. Alex sat in his car, parked a block from his own house, staring into the void of the suburban street. His hands rested on the steering wheel, but his grip was slack, as if all the energy had drained from him. The conversation with Emma played on an endless loop in his mind, her voice sharp and unforgiving. "You can't fix what's broken in you." The words felt like they had been etched into his skin. He hadn't driven home immediately after leaving the coffee shop. Instead, he found himself circling the neighborhood, his thoughts unraveling in a chaotic storm. Every memory of his marriage, every shared laugh, every quiet Sunday morning, every promise, felt like a cruel joke. But now, the storm had passed, and in its place was something far more dangerous: calm. Cold, calculating calm. When Alex finally stepped inside the house, he was met with silence. The kind of silence that seemed to listen, to judge. The living room, with its neatly arranged furniture and carefully chosen decor, felt alien to him now. This was Emma's domain, she had selected every throw pillow, every painting on the walls. Alex had only nodded along during the process, trusting her to build a home for them. But now, that home felt like a stage set, a facade hiding the truth. Alex's gaze fell on the wedding photo hanging above the fireplace. Emma's radiant smile, his own nervous grin, they were strangers to him now. He reached up, took the frame off the wall, and set it face down on the coffee table. Then, he picked up his phone. The next morning, Alex stood in the hardware store, his shopping cart laden with items that would have seemed mundane to any passerby: locks, tools, and a few rolls of industrial-strength duct tape. He moved with precision, his mind focused on the plan forming in the quiet hours of the night. Alex had always been a planner. At work, he thrived on structure, breaking down complex systems into manageable parts. Now, he was applying those same skills to the chaos in his life. As he loaded his purchases into the trunk of his car, he thought of his mother. Linda had always been a master manipulator, using guilt and subtle undermining to get her way. Growing up, Alex had assumed that was just how love worked: conditional, demanding, suffocating. It wasn't until he met Emma that he began to believe in something different, something freeing. But now, he saw the truth. He had traded one manipulator for another. When Alex returned home, he went straight to the basement. The faint smell of damp concrete lingered in the air, and his stomach turned as he remembered the hours he had spent here, locked away like a child being punished. He set to work. The locks were replaced with ones he controlled, the windows reinforced to prevent any chance of escape. Every detail was accounted for, every potential oversight eliminated. As he worked, his thoughts returned to the journal he had discovered during his confinement. At the time, it had seemed like an odd thing to find in the basement, a leather-bound book with pages filled in Linda's neat, cursive handwriting. He hadn't had the chance to read it in full, but one passage in particular stuck with him. Some lessons must be taught the hard way. Control is the only way to ensure loyalty. The words had chilled him then, but now, they fueled him. That evening, Alex sat in his car outside Linda's house, watching the lights flicker on in the living room. She lived alone in a modest ranch-style home on the other side of town. He dialed her number. "Alex," she answered, her tone brisk but expectant. "I was just about to call you. Have you come to your senses yet?" "Yeah, Mom," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. Can we talk? I'll come by now." There was a pause, then a satisfied hum. "Of course, dear. It's about time we had a proper conversation." Alex hung up without another word. Linda opened the door with a smile, but it faltered slightly as she took in Alex's expression. He looked composed, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that gave her pause. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. He entered the house, the familiar smell of lavender and vanilla wrapping around him like a memory he wanted to forget. The living room was pristine, every surface polished, every cushion perfectly fluffed. Linda's obsessive need for control extended to every corner of her life. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the couch. Alex sat, his hands resting on his knees. Linda took the armchair across from him, her posture regal. "I'm glad you're here," she began. "I know this has been a lot for you to process, but it was necessary. You'll see that in time." Alex nodded slowly. "You're right, Mom. It was a lot. But it made me realize something." "Oh. It made me realize how much you've done for me. And how much I owe you." Linda's smile returned, brighter now, triumphant. "I'm so glad you understand, Alex. Sometimes, tough love is the only way." Alex leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. "You're right about that too. Sometimes, people only learn when they're forced to face the truth." Before Linda could respond, Alex reached into his pocket and pulled out the journal. He placed it on the coffee table between them, the leather cover catching the light. Her smile vanished. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice tight. "In the basement," Alex said. "I had a lot of time to look around while I was locked up." Linda's eyes darted to the journal, then back to Alex. "That's private. You had no right." "I had every right," Alex interrupted, his voice rising. "You locked me up like a prisoner, Mom. You've been manipulating me my whole life. And now, I know why." Linda stood, her composure cracking. "You don't understand." "No, I do understand," Alex said, standing as well. "This isn't about helping me. It's about control. It always has been." Linda's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, Alex saw fear in her eyes. "You're going to learn, Mom," he said, his voice steady. "You're going to learn what it feels like to lose control." As Alex drove home, his hands tightened on the wheel. He had one more stop to make, one more person to confront. By the time he pulled into the driveway, the house was dark, except for the faint glow of the living room window. Emma was home. He entered the house quietly, his footsteps muffled against the carpet. Emma was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when he entered, her expression wary. "We need to talk," Alex said. Emma hesitated but set her phone aside. "What now, Alex?" "You'll see," he said, his voice cold. The room was heavy with silence as Alex stood before Emma. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound cutting through the tension. She sat on the couch, her posture rigid, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The glow of her phone screen was gone now, replaced by the sharp, expectant look in her eyes. "You're scaring me, Alex," Emma said finally, her voice sharp but carrying an edge of unease. Alex didn't move. He stayed where he was, the weight of everything he had uncovered pressing down on him like an anchor. "Good," he said flatly. Emma's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" If this is about the conversation we had. This isn't just about our conversation, Alex interrupted. His voice was steady, but his hands betrayed him, curling into fists at his sides. It's about everything, Emma. Everything you've been doing. With Alan. At the mention of the neighbor's name, Emma flinched. She tried to mask it quickly, but Alex caught the flicker of guilt that crossed her face. You don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice rising. Don't I? Alex took a step closer, his eyes locked on hers. I know about the late-night errands. I know about the mornings you're conveniently at his house while I'm at work. I know about the lies, Emma. Her composure cracked. She stood abruptly, her cheeks flushing with anger, or perhaps shame. What do you want me to say, Alex? That I made a mistake. That I needed something you couldn't give me. Is that what you want to hear? Alex didn't answer. He let her words hang in the air, the silence between them stretching and snapping like a taut rubber band. Emma threw up her hands. You've been so checked out, Alex. So distant. What did you think was going to happen? I thought we were supposed to be partners, Alex said, his voice sharp with bitterness. I thought we were supposed to work through things, not run off to the first neighbor who made you feel alive. Emma's lip curled. You're one to talk about loyalty. You let your mother run your life. She's been pulling your strings for years, and you've done nothing to stop her. Alex froze. The words hit their mark, dredging up every argument, every moment he'd let Linda's influence dictate his choices. You're right, he said quietly. Emma blinked, taken aback by his sudden calm. I did let her control me. But not anymore. That night, Alex couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with everything that had unraveled in the past few days. Emma slept beside him, her back turned, her breathing shallow. The distance between them was more than physical now, it was a chasm that felt impossible to bridge. He thought of Linda's journal, the pages he had skimmed in the basement but hadn't fully explored. There were more answers in that book, more pieces to the puzzle of who his mother really was and how her manipulations had shaped his life. Quietly, Alex slipped out of bed and made his way downstairs. The journal was in the same spot he had left it, on the desk in his small home office. He sat down, the leather cover cool against his fingertips, and began to read. Linda Morgan's handwriting was as meticulous as the rest of her life, precise, deliberate, and carefully constructed. The entries spanned years, detailing everything from mundane grocery lists to deeply personal reflections. One passage caught Alex's eye, written during the early years of her marriage to his father. Harold doesn't understand the importance of control. He thinks love is enough, but love is weak without structure. Without discipline. The words made Alex's skin crawl. His father had been a kind, gentle man, but Alex remembered the fights, heated arguments about decisions Linda had made without consulting him. Looking back, Alex realized his mother had always been the one in control, dictating the terms of their lives with an iron grip. Another entry, written shortly after Harold's death, chilled him to the bone. Alex is young and impressionable. He needs guidance. Without Harold, it's up to me to ensure he grows into the man I know he can be. He doesn't need to know the truth. Not yet. The truth? Alex flipped through the pages, searching for more clues. Finally, he found it, an entry written on his 18th birthday. Alex believes Harold was the perfect father, but he doesn't know the whole story. Harold had weaknesses. He let others influence him, and it nearly destroyed our family. I had to intervene, to protect Alex from the same mistakes. Alex's hands trembled as he read the next lines. Alan isn't just a neighbor. He's part of something bigger. Part of what I've worked so hard to build. If Emma's loyalty to Alex falters, it might be the only way to secure what's best for him, even if he doesn't see it yet. The room seemed to tilt as Alex stared at the page. His mother had known about Emma and Alan. More than that, she had orchestrated it. His mind raced. What had she meant by something bigger? How deep did her manipulation run? Alex closed the journal, his heart pounding. His mother had always been a shadowy presence in his life, but this revelation cast her in an entirely new light. She wasn't just controlling, she was calculating, willing to destroy his marriage to serve her own agenda. But why? The next morning, Alex made a decision. He couldn't confront Linda yet, not without more information. He needed answers, and the only way to get them was to dig deeper into her connections. He started with Alan. Parking a few houses down from Alan's home, Alex watched from his car as the man stepped outside, watering his lawn like nothing was amiss. Alan was charming, fit, and exuded the kind of easy confidence that made people trust him. Alex's fists tightened on the steering wheel. This was the man who had betrayed him, who had helped tear his life apart. But there was something else now, something lurking beneath Alex's anger. Curiosity. What role did Alan really play in Linda's schemes? Taking a deep breath, Alex stepped out of the car and walked toward Alan's house. The neighbor looked up, his expression briefly startled before it shifted into a grin. Alex. Morning, man. What's up? Alex stopped a few feet away, forcing a tight smile. We need to talk. Alan's grin faltered, and for a moment, Alex saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt? Fear? Sure, Alan said, setting down the hose. Come on in. As Alex followed Alan into the house, his mind raced with possibilities. He didn't know what he would uncover in the next hour, but one thing was certain, the truth was closer than ever. And when he found it, neither his mother nor Emma would see him coming. Alan's house was almost unnervingly perfect, much like its owner. The living room was immaculate, with a mid-century modern aesthetic that screamed curated rather than lived in. Alex scanned the room as he followed Alan inside, noting the strategically placed artwork, the spotless surfaces. It was a stage set, much like the rest of Alan's carefully constructed persona. Can I get you something? Alan asked, his tone casual. Too casual. He gestured toward the kitchen. Coffee? Water? I'm good, Alex said curtly, taking a seat on the pristine leather couch. His eyes never left Alan, watching for the cracks in his armor. Alan shifted uncomfortably under Alex's gaze, then sat across from him in a matching armchair. So, he said, forcing a smile, what's on your mind? Alex leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his voice low and deliberate. I know about you and Emma. For a moment, Alan froze, the smile faltering before he quickly recovered. He let out a short, nervous laugh. Come on, man. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult me, Alex snapped, his tone sharp enough to cut. I know. And I know my mother was involved. Alan's face fell. He opened his mouth to protest, but Alex cut him off. Save it. I've got enough evidence to blow this whole thing wide open. Emails. Texts. I know everything. He wasn't bluffing, though the extent of his evidence wasn't as damning as he implied. What he lacked in proof, he made up for in conviction. Alan sat back, rubbing the back of his neck. The carefully constructed confidence he wore like a second skin began to crack. Look, man, he said finally, his voice quieter now. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me. Alan hesitated, his eyes darting to the window as if calculating his chances of escape. Finally, he sighed, leaning forward. Your mom. Linda, she came to me. Alex's stomach churned. He'd expected as much, but hearing it confirmed felt like a punch to the gut. Why? She said Emma wasn't happy, Alan said, his voice trembling slightly. She told me you weren't, meeting her needs. She made it sound like I'd be helping, doing you both a favor. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You didn't mean for it to go this far? Alex repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. He stood abruptly, towering over Alan. You slept with my wife because my mother asked you to. What kind of man does that? Alan flinched but didn't answer. Alex took a deep breath, forcing himself to regain control. Losing his temper wouldn't help now. Why would my mother do this? What's in it for her? Alan hesitated again, but Alex's glare left no room for argument. She said it was about control, Alan admitted finally. She didn't say it outright, but I got the sense it wasn't just about Emma. It was about keeping you in line. Like, if she could prove you couldn't handle your marriage, she'd have leverage over you. Alex clenched his fists, his mind racing. It made sense in a twisted way. Linda had always thrived on power, on manipulating situations to her advantage. But this, using his marriage as a pawn in her games, was a new level of cruelty. By the time Alex left Alan's house, his hands were trembling. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they formed was darker than he had imagined. Linda's interference in his life had always been suffocating, but now it was clear just how far she was willing to go to maintain control. As he drove home, Alex's mind churned with ideas. Confrontation wasn't enough anymore. Linda and Emma had taken so much from him, his trust, his dignity, his sense of stability. He couldn't let them get away with it. He parked the car in the driveway and sat there for a moment, staring at the house. His home. Or at least, it had been. Now it felt like a hollow shell, a place where lies had taken root and grown like weeds. But Alex wasn't defeated. Not yet. That night, Alex sat at his desk, the journal spread open before him. He read and reread Linda's entries, piecing together her motives and methods. Every line was a glimpse into the mind of a woman who thrived on manipulation, who believed control was the only path to loyalty. He also began to plan. The key to taking them down, Alex realized, was not just exposing the truth but forcing Linda and Emma to face the consequences of their actions. He needed to hit them where it hurt, to dismantle the power they held over him and each other. He started with the emails and texts he had gathered from Emma's phone. There were enough incriminating messages between her and Alan to raise questions in their social circles. Alex wasn't interested in public humiliation, yet, but he needed leverage. Next, he went through his financial records. He had always trusted Emma to manage their joint accounts, but now he scrutinized every transaction. Sure enough, there were discrepancies, charges he didn't recognize, funds transferred without his knowledge. And then there was Linda. Alex knew she had her secrets, buried deep beneath her carefully constructed persona. He began digging into her past, using the journal as a guide. There were names, dates, places, clues that hinted at a web of connections and manipulations far beyond her interference in his marriage. By the end of the week, Alex had everything he needed. The evidence, the plan, the resolve. He was no longer the passive son, the oblivious husband. He was in control now, and he was ready to make his move. The confrontation began on a Saturday evening, under the guise of a family dinner. Linda had invited herself over, as she often did, and Emma had reluctantly agreed to play hostess. The atmosphere was tense from the start. Alex watched as Linda and Emma exchanged forced pleasantries, both unaware of what was coming. Halfway through the meal, Alex set his fork down and cleared his throat. "I need to say something," he began, his voice calm but firm. Linda raised an eyebrow, her wine glass poised in midair. Emma looked up, her eyes wary. "I know about Alan," Alex said, his gaze fixed on Emma. Her face drained of color, her fork clattering to the plate. "And I know about you," he added, turning to Linda. "I know everything." Linda's expression didn't falter. If anything, she seemed amused. "Everything?" she repeated, her tone dripping with condescension. "What exactly do you think you know, Alex?" "I know you've been controlling my life for years," Alex said, his voice rising. "I know you manipulated Emma, and Alan, and who knows how many others. But it ends tonight." Linda leaned back in her chair, her smile cold. "And what are you going to do about it?" Alex pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. The audio file began to play, a conversation between Alan and Linda, recorded during Alex's visit to Alan's house. Linda's smile vanished. As the recording played, the color drained from Linda's face, and Emma's expression shifted from shock to anger. When the file ended, Alex stood, his voice steady. "Now you know what it feels like to lose control," he said. The house of cards had begun to collapse. The recording ended, and the silence that followed was deafening. The clinking of silverware, the faint hum of the refrigerator, these ordinary sounds became stark contrasts to the chaos simmering beneath the surface. Alex remained standing at the head of the table, his phone still in hand, his heart pounding in his chest. Linda was the first to speak, her voice a dagger wrapped in velvet. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her tone sharp, her eyes narrowing to slits. Alex didn't flinch. That's not the question you should be asking, he replied, his voice steady. You should be asking yourself how you let it come to this. Emma's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood, her hands gripping the edge of the table for support. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. Alex, she began, her voice unsteady, I didn't know. Don't, Alex cut her off, his eyes burning into hers. Don't stand there and pretend you're a victim in this. You knew what you were doing every time you went to Alan's house. Every lie you told. Every excuse. You knew. Emma shrank back, her defenses crumbling under the weight of his words. Linda, however, was less willing to concede. She leaned forward, her steely gaze fixed on Alex. You don't understand, Alex, she said, her voice low and deliberate. Everything I've done for you. To protect you. To make you stronger. Alex let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Protect me? You've been sabotaging me my entire life. You manipulated Emma. You meddled in my marriage. You even used Alan as a pawn. For what? To prove you're the one pulling the strings? Linda's composure cracked, her voice rising. You're my son. I've sacrificed everything for you. And this is how you repay me. By turning on your own mother. You didn't sacrifice anything for me, Alex shot back. You sacrificed me for your obsession with control. You destroyed everything I cared about to make yourself feel powerful. Emma sank back into her chair, her hands trembling as she reached for her wine glass. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke. How long have you known? Long enough, Alex said without looking at her. Long enough to see the person you really are. And long enough to decide I'm done with both of you. Emma's eyes widened. Alex, please, Stop, he said, his voice cold. I'm not interested in your apologies or your excuses. I don't care what reasons you had or what you thought you were getting out of this. It's over. Linda stood abruptly, her chair toppling backward. She glared at Alex, her chest rising and falling with quick, shallow breaths. You think you're so righteous, she spat. But you're just like your father. Weak. Passive. Unable to take charge of your own life. Alex's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to her bait. You're wrong, he said quietly. I've finally taken charge. That's why this ends here. He pulled out a second document, this one a printout of financial statements, legal documents, and copies of emails. He placed it on the table, sliding it toward Linda and Emma. These are copies of everything I've uncovered, he said. Your lies. Your schemes. Your betrayal. If either of you tries to contact me again, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. I'll send these to your friends, your colleagues, your social circles. I'll ruin you. Linda's face went pale, her eyes darting to the papers. You wouldn't dare, she whispered. Try me, Alex said, his voice icy. You've both underestimated me for too long. That's over. The aftermath of that night played out like a storm tearing through their lives. Linda retreated into the shadows, her influence shattered. Emma moved out within days, taking the silence between them as the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. Alex stayed in the house, but it no longer felt like home. The walls held too many memories, too much pain. But as the weeks passed, Alex began to rebuild. He threw himself into his work, finding solace in the structure and order it provided. He joined a gym, rediscovering a part of himself he had neglected for years. He began therapy, unpacking the years of manipulation and betrayal that had shaped him. Through it all, he learned to trust himself again. One evening, months later, Alex found himself standing in the basement, the place where everything had begun. The air was cool, the light bulb casting long shadows on the walls. He held Linda's journal in his hands, the final piece of the puzzle. With deliberate movements, he opened the journal and began tearing out the pages, one by one. Each rip felt like a release, a severing of the ties that had bound him for so long. When he was finished, he gathered the pieces into a pile and set them alight. The flames danced, consuming the words that had haunted him. As the fire burned, Alex felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt free. The story of Linda and Emma became a chapter in his life, a cautionary tale about trust, control, and the resilience of the human spirit. Alex emerged from the ashes of their betrayal stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. Because now, he knew, the only person who could control his life was him. What would you do if betrayed by those closest to you? Share your thoughts on Alex's journey, his revenge, and his path to freedom.